Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rajan Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi last week said 1.3 billion Indians have embarked on one mission to create an Atmanirbhar Bharat which seeks to merge the local with the global and ensure the country's strengths act as a global force multiplier. Time and time again, India has shown that our goal is global good, said Prime Minister Modi in his special keynote address at the third leadership summit of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum via video conferencing. Pitching India amongst the best investment destinations worldwide, the Prime Minister said that the country's political stability and policy continuity makes it the best place for global investors looking for attractive business opportunities during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Prime Minister's pitch to merge local with global. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Tandon, senior journalist, Meera Shankar, former ambassador, and Shakti Sinha, director, Delhi School of Public Policy and Governance. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand and analyze the Prime Minister's keynote address at the US ISPF.
Well, I think the Prime Minister focused on the economic opportunities which are opening up in India. And this is very timely because, the world is looking at new models of doing business. They want to de-risk, not be totally dependent on one country like China. And they're also looking at diversifying supply chains. Now, so there's an opportunity for India to build its capabilities, attract foreign investment, and do both things at the same time. So, but it's not that it's going to flow to India automatically. We have some strengths, a large market, a very young demography. So, there will be consumers entering the market, and a capable manpower, which is, able to absorb high technology and work in those areas. But we also have weaknesses, and those weaknesses I think we need to address. From my point of view, I think the most important is the cost of doing business, which is very high in India. It's not just the ease of doing business, because when someone's looking at putting his money, he's seeing where he gets the biggest bang for his buck. And therefore, a lot of investment has been going to Vietnam, to Philippines, to even to Bangladesh. We have had some success with Foxconn, which has come in and is making some number of Apple phones in India. So it's not that we can't do it, but we have to address the cost of doing business. And this involves the very high cost of finance. Even though our interest rates have come down, they're much higher than global interest rates. The cost of land, which is a very painful process to put together because the land is in parcels. And the third is the cost of electricity for industry, because we cross-subsidize consumers. So we keep industry tariffs very high and consumer tariffs low. All over the world, it is the reverse, where industry tariffs are lower than consumer tariffs to foster industrialization. So what this does is that it makes the cost of production in India higher and less competitive than other global destinations, and we need to find ways to address this.
All right. I think these are some very pertinent points that you raised. The challenges really that we need to look at and that we need to sort out going forward if we really want to be a global manufacturing hub or a global manufacturing destination. So, Mr. Tandon, let me bring you in now. So, to ensure that we see the kind of India that the Prime Minister wants for us, what kind of policy level changes also do we need to see? Land reforms, we've been talking about it for several decades now, it's still going on. We're still looking at them. How important is all of this? How important is it to get all of this together if we want to see the India of our dreams?
When the Prime Minister addresses international audience and particularly potential investors, he has to first give them an assurance about the domestic political situation, the economic situation, and the ground reality. Because our perception abroad, particularly among the Western investor, is not very good. So that is why, while he was addressing the potential investors, he first gave a picture of how India has been dealing with the pandemic. And because he took the example of the COVID-19, from one testing lab to 1,600 testing lab, and at the same time feeding 800 million people. All these assurances Prime Minister was giving just to, portray the picture of how India is developing. So from Prime Minister, Atmanirbhar Bharat for the domestic audience is a different connotation, and for the international audience is a different connotation. So here, number one, he was trying to tell the international audience and the investor that we have handled the COVID-19 situation extremely well. We have taken care of our poor people, and our goal is, helping the poor. After, giving this a bright picture of the emerging India, because in India he talks of vocal for local, but now he was talking of merging local with global. So in India, which is already on the move, will be a very positive and a very interesting climate destination for investment climate. So then he brings in the reforms. What reforms India has done for its domestic people as well as for the potential investor. So he was trying to balance the situation. That he was not just opening doors for foreign investment in sectors like pharma, defense, atomic energy, railway, etc. No, he said, well, we are also progressing. We are doing a satisfactory job. And now I'm inviting foreign investors. And then he gave a lot of outlines, the concessions which are now being notified, whether it's tax regime or whether it is, doing away with red tapeism, etc. Because Ambassador Meena Shankar may be knowing better when she was ambassador in the United States, that by and large, India is not very well known in the international arena. So you have to first give a bright picture, a positive picture of your own home turf, and then invite the foreign investors. So I think in that context, Prime Minister's saying that now the local has to be merged with global was an invitation to foreign investors. Please come here. We are opening up so many sectors, and we are giving you a very comfortable and fertile destination for investment. So I think it was a good balancing act on the part of the Prime Minister to project India in a positive tone, and also at the same time, invite investors, giving them whatever are the expectations of the potential foreign investors.
Absolutely. All right. So, Mr. Sinha, let me come across to you now. Let me take you back a few years to your days as a bureaucrat and take the points that, that the ambassador and Mr. Tandon are making forward with you. The central government can make these pitches, go out, speak to potential investors, try and bring them in. But if the states don't go along, it's going to be another problem altogether, isn't it?
Exactly. In fact, when I was hearing the Prime Minister speak the other day, when you were speaking and we were hearing it live, what was coming to mind is exactly that. While the vision at the top is very clear, and the Prime Minister listed it out very categorically what we want to do, and we have made considerable progress. The fact is, from the Prime Minister down to the lakhs of people in the services, in the government system, not just the state government, down to the district and down to literally the Patwari and the Karate at the village level, to change their mindset into looking at development, looking at a private investment as something India needs is not going to be easy. Lots of things have changed for the better. Let's not be cynical. But, and I'm so glad, therefore, to link up with the other announcement made, which is the Karam Yogi, the mission Karam Yogi. The need for government servants across the country, across the levels, not just the top. You can convert the top 100 people, 1,000 people. But then when it comes to 10,000, 1 lakh and 5 lakh, what happens? And therefore, the users of this Karam Yogi platform to allow people to upgrade themselves and develop the necessary skills. So in many cases, skills are a problem. And therefore, as Meena Shankar very rightly pointed out, you can ease of doing register business easily, but can you run businesses easily or not? Taxation, we have simplified it, and yet at the process level for GST, it still is a hassle. Then we keep making slight changes in policy to accommodate difficulties. Some amount of policy uncertainty comes in. Though the PM talked about policy uncertainty, the fact is that different moments under pressure of problems, we do make changes. Investors get a little nervous on this. So, and that problem arises because our bureaucrats, civil servants are simply not good enough to understand the kind of policies required. And therefore the need to equip them to strengthen their capacities and to interact with the private sector and society. Because you have to put all three. Government is there, society is outside, the private sector is there. How do you build synergies to attract the kind of investment required? India has to create a minimum of 12 million jobs annually. How do you do that in industry is a big problem. And therefore, I think you're so right. The states and the districts have to get their act together. It cannot just be driven by the top. The top can give this vision, top can make necessary changes. But if these people don't rise to the occasion, then it's going to be a long haul. And that is something we have to recognize.
All right, so let's take this particular aspect forward. Ambassador, do the foreign investors understand these complexities? How do they work around these complexities? These are some issues that need to be addressed as well. And how can we address these issues?
See, the foreign investors understand these complexities, especially if they are coming from a federal structure like the United States, where the federal government may have one policy, one state may have another policy, and the companies there are very used to playing off states one against the other to try to get the best concessional deal for themselves. So that they are prepared for. But buying land, if infrastructure is not there, I think if the government could really set up industrial parks like they did the technology parks, and it needn't be, a very large number, it could be just 10 big, large technology parks along the coast with appropriate infrastructure, not waiting, for somebody from the private sector to come and put in the electricity, to get all the clearances in advance, environmental, etc., especially if the park is reserved for certain kinds of industry which are not environmentally problematic. Then you have the ability to say, look, here is a place, come and set up your industry tomorrow and we'll help you run it. So I think land would be a key thing. Then you need innovative policies like, look, you have the Taj Hotel, Mansingh in Delhi. What is it? It was built on land given by NDMC. That land was NDMC's investment in the project. So they are a co-investor. The Taj Hotel has the contract to run it. So instead of where you want something quickly, land is very expensive, leasing the land or the government using the land as equity on which they can get returns also over a period of time. All these are structures and models which need to be tried to get things going. I think that in terms of finance, we have actually, some of our companies have been raising, I think one of the problems we have is the absence of long-term finance. We do not have, our loans from the banks are for 10 years, 12 years. We do not have 30-year loans or bonds for raising finance for infrastructure projects or any projects. And if you have that ability, and you're basically, earning enough, it becomes virtually a self-financing proposal. Over 30 years, you are able to pay that debt. The absence of long-term debt in India, I think, is a serious gap which we need to address. I think the government should focus on it. Some of our companies are addressing it by really the large ones, by going out to the international market and raising loans there, in dollar terms, completely hedged. And still they find that the rate of interest, despite the hedge, works out cheaper. And if they get a 30-year loan, or bond, then, you know, their financing becomes much easier. So I'm just giving these as examples. There are innovative things that you need to do, and hand holding becomes very important. Now, it can be done. I'll tell you, when I was ambassador in Germany and BMW was planning to come to India, and they had a plan. They were very worried because Germans had not come here in very large numbers, and they were wondering whether they will be able to set up. But they got the commitment of the Jayalalitha government to the project. They had a work chart saying that it will take 18 months for them to get their factory and their whole project off the ground. But they came back to me. They were very worried that they'll not be able to adhere to deadlines, and they came back to me saying, actually, they did it before the 18 months were over, because there was political commitment at the highest level from the state leadership, and all obstacles which may have arisen were all cleared with intervention. And I think that is the kind of model that we need. That chief ministers have to make their governments investor friendly, knowing the problems which arise at the grassroots level. They have to be prepared to use their authority to push these project proposals and actually have somebody who will help to address each of their major or minor issues.
Sure. Okay, points taken. Let me bring in another aspect, Mr. Tandon. In all of this, there is another issue as well. Where there is hand holding. If certain companies are told what to do and how to do it, then you have the local manufacturers, Indian companies who talk about favoritism and who talk about those kind of issues as well. So how do you strike a balance?
No, look at the Prime Minister's catchphrase: vocal for local. Now, when you become vocal for local, means obvious references to, not buying foreign goods. I don't want to name the country, but for that you have to become a manufacturing hub. And unless you become a manufacturing hub, how can you be relying, be vocal for local? And for to become a manufacturing hub, ease of doing business, Startup India, Stand Up India, all these projects, you need collaboration. When the collaborations come, you get the FDI also. And when you become a manufacturing hub, then obviously it will not only be confined to the Indian market. So we have already shown to the world that in pharmaceutical sector, India is already a chain multiplier, a supplier. We have supplied pharmaceutical, medicine, etc. to more than 100 countries. So if more and more manufacturing comes to India with the help of joint ventures and FDI, obviously India will be a huge hub for manufacturing, and that will help India to become a global player. Because as I said, our aim is to do global good. And unless we participate with the rest of the world, we can't be just talking, in terms of having vocal for local. From where will the local stuff come? So therefore, you have to have joint ventures. I think in that context, the Atmanirbhar Bharat concept of the Prime Minister, it includes vocal for local as well as merging local with global. So it very clearly says we will not become Atmanirbhar Bharat for our 1.3 billion people, but will also be contributing to the global good, the global economy, welfare, in pharmaceutical and even in defense production. So therefore, I think we have to see the whole concept of merging local with global in that wider context, not in the narrow context. And who will be the partners? The domestic players will be the partners in FDI. The FDI is not coming alone. They need an Indian partner, whether it is defense, whether it is automobile, whether it is atomic energy, whether it is railways, whether it is, all these segments which the Prime Minister is opening up for foreign investors will need a local partner. And there are plenty of local partners who have reputation in the international market. So I think that the whole issue is now well understood by all the stakeholders in India. That is why the approach of the government is now moving towards that end. And that is exactly what the Prime Minister was trying to reassure the global players, the foreign investors, that India is the place where you can rely. And that is why he listed all the achievements which his government has done to reassure the world that we are not only capable of managing our own domestic problems and issues and also domestic market, but we can become a global hub for production also.
Okay. All right, points taken. So let me take a couple of aspects forward with you, Mr. Sinha, and bring in another element as well. So we've seen Vietnam doing really well as far as FDI is concerned, Bangladesh doing extremely well as far as textiles are concerned. What is it that they are doing differently? Is there something that we can learn from these smaller nations and incorporate it here in India? Is it going to be easy for us to do that? And also another issue, Mr. Tandon was talking about collaboration. We've seen several collaborations taking place at the highest level and several major mega projects being undertaken across the country. But the lack of pace is another issue that we need to be concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, first starting with the Vietnam and Bangladesh example, a couple of things are important. One, of course, is that since both the countries did not have a strong local manufacturing base, to build up on a previous question, so there weren't anybody there who wanted to prevent kind of a foreign thing, or what concerns. Preventing is a strong word, concerns. If I'm a domestic manufacturer, I'm living with high tariffs, I'm living with difficulties of taxation, with high interest, and I see a foreigner coming in, I feel resentful. Now, to manage the transition is difficult, which is what the government is trying to do. Bangladesh and Vietnam, in that sense, started from a more or less a clean slate. Number two, they made things easier, whether it was labor reforms, whether availability of electricity, of land. In the case of Bangladesh, labor, especially for the garment sector, their garment factories employ 5,000 people. We employ 200 people. They get the economies of scale. We do not. So, these are the kind of barriers that we have created over 50, 60 years that are difficult to get rid of. And therefore, we have to, in that sense, really make a changeover, because we need $650 billion of fresh investments every year. FDI will be 50 billion, 40 billion, 60 billion. Balance is domestic, right? We have to create an environment which enables all investments to come in. Forget the color of the investment. And of course, where domestic industry has faced barriers, help them out, work out solutions, long-term money. Earlier we had IDBI Bank, IFCI, ICICI, etc. People had long-term capital. Now we don't have it. So work out ways to smoothen out the entry of all investments, foreign or local. The tensions between the balancing that you wanted between Indian and foreign will go away completely. And that is, I think, is very, very critical for us. How do we move down that path to ensure that really these things come up? Now, collaborations work sometimes they don't work. Many good companies are on their own, have done well on their own. Many need domestic hand-holding. Depends on the sector, depends on the company. So I don't think we're too worried about that. I mean, so much of our best companies, you now realize, are actually foreign companies in India for 50 years, 100 years. So we think of them as Indian companies, So that depends on each company. So I don't think so we should be really worried about collaboration. We should be more worried about how do I induce investments into manufacturing. And that is something which is $1 million question, which is not million, $1 billion question.
Absolutely. I was just going to get to that. It is the $1 billion question, really. How do we incite and induce, in fact, foreign investment into this, and how do we ensure we take that forward? Talking about taking things forward, quick closing comments now with the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador.
Firstly, I would, to your question, how do we balance between local and global? I would say that these policies should not be only for FDI. They should be for all investment, domestic or foreign, which creates jobs, which creates capacities, which sets up manufacturing facilities in India. So I think we should not distinguish and say industrial parks, if they are set up, should be open to domestic investors as well, to invest as well as foreign investors. So I think that is something which we must keep in mind. Secondly, I think we also need to use government policies, let's say, where we have been dependent on imports, such as solar, where if the government says that we are going to procure for the next 10 years or 5 years, X amount of solar equipment, which has value, X amount of value addition in India, this would be acceptable because India is not a part of the government procurement agreement under the WTO. So we are able to do this. If we do this, capacities will be set up to supply the government
Sure.
instead of just importing from China. So a smart, I wouldn't say over-regulate because we are already over-regulated in so many sectors, but smart regulation. And if you see the two sectors where we have succeeded in India, one is pharma, which has been referred to. The other is automobiles. Both have been as a result of facilitative government policies. In automobiles, we kept high tariffs. So the incentive was for companies to come into India, make components and their automobiles in India rather than supplying from outside.
Sure.
Now, and in pharma, in the 70s, we had a patent law which did not recognize product patents, only recognized process patents. So it was legally open to our companies to produce the same product through a different process. And that is how they built their capacities for generic pharma, where we are now almost like supplying the world. So these are the sectors where you can see the direct impact of intelligent government policies leading to capacity creations in India rather than supply from outside. And we have to bend our mind to this as well. Apart from facilitating, reducing the cost of doing business, creating land banks, better finance, etc., I think we need to also look at intelligent government regulation, which would provide an incentive to set up capacities in India rather than supply from outside. Because our biggest plus that we have going for us is the size of our market. But we haven't been able to leverage it because we have joined many free trade agreements, and so you get supplies at zero duties or subsidized supplies from countries like China. So here you have to look at how you can provide an incentive for manufacturing in India rather than outside supply.
Absolutely. Mr. Tandon.
No, I would like to conclude by saying that now, since every day we get reports of, manufacturing hub being shifted from China to India. So in that context, the Prime Minister reassurance to the global investors with respect to India's democracy, India's political stability, policy continuity, and also the diversity of India. So all these issues, I think, are to address the concerns of the global investors about India itself. That you are looking at India, which is young. 65% of the population is young. So I think these kind of political reassurance on the political front was also necessary, and that is exactly what the Prime Minister did while concluding his speech. So I think these reassurances are required, particularly when we are talking of the investors from the Western world.
Sure. All right. And Mr. Sinha, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
A strong partnership between the central government, the state governments, a strengthened and well-equipped intellectually and in terms of skills, bureaucracy and civil services, and the ability to develop policy that will encourage investment. That is the way forward. It's not an easy job, but I don't think so, as the PM said, for aspirational India, we have any other option.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that there is a major cost of doing business in India, not just ease of doing business, and these issues need to be addressed. High cost of finance, cost of land, cost of production. These are also issues that need special attention and need special focus if we have to ensure that we get more investment from abroad. What we need going forward is innovative ideas to deal with issues like land and finance. We also need better coordination between the states and the center. Why have countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam done well as far as FDI is concerned? Because they have started with clean slates, unlike us, where we've had legacy issues for several decades. Now that needs a systemic overhaul, and that's what we are working on. With that, it's a wrap.